The Fables of Aesop. In Part 6 of Aesop's Fables, we'll again be reading from the Hodder and Stoughton edition published in London in 1909, and we'll be reading the stories Between the Weasel and the Mice and The Birds, the Beasts, and the Bat. Before we begin, just a reminder, while the actual details of his life are hazy at best, Aesop is best known to us as a Greek slave living in the 5th century BC, whose cleverness and wit embarrassed his philosopher master and won him his freedom. His subsequent travels put him as an emissary and interpreter, but most importantly, a writer. His many fables, such as The Hare and the Tortoise and The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, have long since become proverbial. The Fables of Aesop. The Weasel and the Mice. A weasel, inactive from age and infirmities, was not able to catch mice as he once did. He therefore rolled himself in flour and lay down in a dark corner. A mouse, supposing him to be food, leapt upon him, and, being instantly caught, was squeezed to death. Another perished in a similar manner, and then a third, and still others after them. A very old mouse, who had escaped many a trap and snare, observing from a safe distance the trick of his crafty foe, and said, "Ah, you that lie there, may you prosper just in the same proportion as you are what you pretend to be." The Boy Bathing. A boy bathing in a river was in danger of being drowned. He called out to a traveler passing by for help. The traveler, instead of holding out a helping hand, stood by unconcernedly and scolded the boy for his imprudence. "Oh, sir," cried the youth, "pray help me now and scold me afterwards." Counsel without help is useless. The Apes and the Two Travelers. Two men, one of whom always spoke the truth and the other nothing but lies, were traveling together, and by chance came to the land of the apes. One of the apes, who had raised himself to be king, commanded them to be laid hold of and brought before him, that he might know what was said of him among men. He ordered at the same time that all the apes should be arranged in a long row on his right hand and on his left, and that a throne should be placed for him, as was the custom among men. After these preparations, he signified his will that the two men should be brought before him, and he greeted them with this salutation: "What sort of a king do I seem to you to be, O strangers?" The lying traveler replied, "You seem to me a most mighty king." "And what is your estimate of those you see around me?" "These," he made answer, "are worthy companions of yourself, fit at least to be ambassadors and leaders of armies." The ape and all his court, gratified with the lie, commanded a handsome present to be given to the flatterer. On this, the truthful traveler thought within himself, "If so great a reward be given for a lie, with what gift may I not be rewarded, if, according to my custom, I shall tell the truth?" The ape quickly turned to him, "And pray, how do I and these my friends around me seem to you?" "Thou art," he said, "a most excellent ape, and all these thy companions after thy example are excellent apes too." The king of the apes, enraged at hearing these truths, gave him over to the teeth and claws of his companions. The Wolf and the Shepherd. A wolf followed a flock of sheep for a long time and did not attempt to injure one of them. The shepherd at first stood on his guard against him as against an enemy and kept a strict watch over his movements. But when the wolf, day after day, kept in the company of the sheep and did not make the slightest effort to seize them, the shepherd began to look upon him as a guardian of his flock, rather than as a plotter of evil against it. And when occasion called him one day into the city, he left the sheep entirely in his charge. The wolf, now that he had the opportunity, fell upon the sheep and destroyed the greater part of the flock. The shepherd, on his return, finding his flock destroyed, exclaimed, "I have been rightly served. Why did I trust my sheep to a wolf?" The Hares and the Lions. The hares harangued the assembly and argued that all should be on an equality. The lions made this reply, "Your words, O hares, are good, but they lack both claws and teeth such as we have." The lark and her young ones. A lark had made her nest in the early spring on the young green wheat. The brood had almost grown to their proper strength and attained the use of their wings and the full plumage of their feathers, when the owner of the field, overlooking his crop, now quite ripe, said, "The time has come when I must send to all my neighbors to help me with my harvest." One of the young larks heard his speech and related it to his mother, inquiring of her to what place they should move for safety. "There is no occasion to move yet, my son," she replied. "The man who only sends to his friends to help him with his harvest is not really in earnest." The owner of the field again came a few days later and saw the wheat shedding the grain from excess of ripeness, and said, "I will come myself tomorrow with my laborers, and with as many reapers as I can hire, and will get in the harvest." The lark, on hearing these words, said to her brood, "It is time now to be off, my little ones, for the man is in earnest this time. He no longer trusts to his friends, but will reap the field himself. Self-help is the best help." The Peacock and Juno. The peacock made complaint to Juno that while the nightingale pleased every ear with his song, he no sooner opened his mouth than he became a laughing-stock to all who heard him. The goddess, to console him, said, "But you far excel in beauty and in size. The splendor of the emerald shines in your neck, and you unfold a tail gorgeous with painted plumage." "But for what purpose have I," said the bird, "this dumb beauty, so long as I am surpassed in song?" "The lot of each," replied Juno, "has been assigned by the will of the fates. To thee, beauty; to the eagle, strength; to the nightingale, song; to the raven, favorable; and to the crow, unfavorable auguries. These are all contented with the endowments allotted to them." The Ass and the Wolf. An ass, feeding in a meadow, saw a wolf approaching to seize him, and immediately pretended to be lame. The wolf, coming up, inquired the cause of his lameness. The ass said that passing through a hedge he trod with his foot upon a sharp thorn, and requested the wolf to pull it out, lest when he supped on him it should injure his throat. The wolf consenting, and lifting up the foot, and giving his whole mind to the discovery of the thorn, the ass with his heels kicked his teeth into his mouth and galloped away. The wolf, being thus fearfully mauled, said, "I am rightly served, for why did I attempt the art of healing when my father only taught me the trade of a butcher?" The Seller of Images. A certain man made a wooden image of Mercury and offered it for sale. When no one appeared willing to buy it, in order that he might attract purchasers, he cried out that he had the statue to sell of a benefactor who bestowed wealth and helped to heap up riches. One of the bystanders said to him, "My good fellow, why do you sell him, being such a one as you describe, when you may yourself enjoy the good things he has to give?" "Why," he replied, "I am in want of immediate help, and he is wont to give his good gifts very slowly." The Hawk and the Nightingale. A nightingale sitting aloft upon an oak and singing according to his wont was seen by a hawk, who being in want of food made a swoop down and seized him. The nightingale, about to lose his life, earnestly besought the hawk to let him go, saying that he was not big enough to satisfy the hunger of a hawk, who, if he wanted food, ought to pursue the larger birds. The hawk, interrupting him, said, "I should indeed have lost my senses if I should let go food ready to my hand, for the sake of pursuing birds which are not yet even within sight." The Dog, the Cock, and the Fox. A dog and a cock, being great friends, agreed to travel together. At nightfall they took shelter in a thick wood. The cock, flying up, perched himself on the branches of a tree, while the dog found a bed beneath in the hollow trunk. When the morning dawned, the cock, as usual, crowed very loudly several times. A fox, hearing the sound and wishing to make a breakfast on him, came and stood under the branches. saying how earnestly he desired to make the acquaintance of the owner of so magnificent a voice. The cock, suspecting his civilities, said, "Sir, I wish you would do me the favor to go round to the hollow trunk below me and wake up my porter, that he may open the door and let you in." On the fox approaching the tree, the dog sprang out and caught him, and tore him in pieces. The Crab and the Fox. A crab, forsaking the seashore, chose a neighboring green meadow as its feeding ground. A fox came across him, and being very much famished, ate him up. Just as he was on the point of being eaten, he said, "I well deserve my fate, for what business had I on the land, when by my nature and habits I am only adapted for the sea?" Contentment with our lot is an element of happiness. The Old Lion. A lion, worn out with years and powerless from disease, lay on the ground at the point of death. A boar rushed upon him, and avenged with a stroke of his tusks a long-remembered injury. Shortly afterwards the bull with his horns gored him as if he were an enemy. When the ass saw that the huge beast could be assailed with impunity, he let drive at his forehead with his heels. The expiring lion said, "I have reluctantly brooked the insults of the brave, but to be compelled to endure contumely from thee, a disgrace to nature, is indeed to die a double death." The Fox and the Mask. A fox entered the house of an actor, and, rummaging through all his properties, came upon a mask, an admirable imitation of a human head. He placed his paws on it and said, "What a beautiful head! Yet it is of no value, as it entirely wants brains." The Eagle and the Beetle. The eagle and the beetle were at enmity together, and they destroyed one another's nests. The eagle gave the first provocation in seizing upon and in eating the young ones of the beetle. The beetle got by stealth at the eagle's eggs and rolled them out of the nest, and followed the eagle even into the presence of Jupiter. On the eagle making his complaint, Jupiter ordered him to make his nest on his lap, and while Jupiter had the eggs in his lap, the beetle came flying about him, and Jupiter, rising up unawares to drive him away from his head, threw down the eggs and broke them. The weak often revenge themselves on those who use them ill, even though they be more powerful. The Two Dogs. A man had two dogs, a hound trained to assist him in his sports, and a house dog taught to watch the house. When he returned home after a good day's sport, he always gave the house dog a large share of his spoil. The hound, feeling much aggrieved at this reproach, said to his companion, "It is very hard to have all this labor, while you, who do not assist in the chase, luxuriate on the fruits of my exertions." The house dog replied, "Do not blame me, my friend, but find fault with the master, who has not taught me to labor, but to depend for subsistence on the labor of others." Children are not to be blamed for the faults of their parents. The Farmer and the Fox. A farmer, having a long spite against a fox for robbing his poultry yard, caught him at last, and, being determined to take an ample revenge, tied some tow well soaked in oil to his tail and set it on fire. The fox, by a strange fatality, rushed to the fields of the farmer who had captured him. It was the time of the wheat harvest, but the farmer reaped nothing that year, and returned home grieving sorely. The Fowler and the Viper. A fowler, taking his birdlime and his twigs, went out to catch birds. Seeing a thrush sitting upon a tree, he wished to take it, and fitting his twigs to a proper length, he watched intently, having his whole thoughts directed towards the sky. While thus looking upwards, he unawares trod upon a viper asleep just before his feet. The viper, turning towards him, stung him, and he, falling into a swoon, said to himself, "Woe is me, that while I purposed to hunt another, am myself fallen unawares into the snares of death." The Horse and the Ass. A horse, proud of his fine trappings, met an ass on the highway. The ass, being heavily laden, moved slowly out of the way. "Hardly," said the horse, "can I resist kicking you with my heels." The ass held his peace and made only a silent appeal to the justice of the gods. Not long afterwards, the horse, having become broken-winded, was sent by his owner to the farm. The ass, seeing him drawing a dung cart, thus derided him, "Where, O boaster, are now all thy gay trappings, who art thyself reduced to the condition you so lately treated with contempt?" The Town Mouse and the Country Mouse. A country mouse invited a town mouse, an intimate friend, to pay him a visit and partake of his country fare. As they were on the bare plowlands, eating their wheat stalks and roots pulled up from the hedgerows, the town mouse said to his friend, "You live here the life of the ants, while in my house is the horn of plenty. I am surrounded with every luxury, and if you will come with me, as I much wish you would, you shall have an ample share of my dainties." The country mouse was easily persuaded and returned to town with his friend. On his arrival, the town mouse placed before him bread, barley, beans, dried figs, honey, raisins, and last of all, brought a dainty piece of cheese from a basket. The country mouse, being much delighted at the sight of such good cheer, expressed his satisfaction in warm terms, and lamented his own hard fate. Just as they were beginning to eat, someone opened the door, and they both ran off, squeaking as fast as they could, to a hole so narrow that two could only find room in it by squeezing. They had scarcely again begun their repast when someone else entered to take something out of a cupboard, on which the two mice, more frightened than before, ran away and hid themselves. At last the country mouse, almost famished, thus addressed his friend, "Although you have prepared for me so dainty a feast, I must leave you to enjoy it by yourself. It is surrounded by too many dangers to please me. I prefer my bare plowlands and roots from the hedgerows, so that I only can live in safety and without fear." The Goat and the Ass. A man once kept a goat and an ass. The goat, envying the ass on account of his greater abundance of food, said, "How shamefully you are treated, at one time grinding in the mill, and at another carrying heavy burdens." And he further advised him that he should pretend to be epileptic, and fall into a ditch, and so obtain rest. The ass gave credence to his words, and falling into a ditch was very much bruised. His master, sending for a leech, asked his advice. He bade him pour upon the wounds the lights of a goat. They at once killed the goat, and so healed the ass. The Fly and the Draft Mule. A fly sat on the axle-tree of a chariot, and addressing the draft mule said, "How slow you are! Why do you not go faster? See if I do not prick your neck with my sting." The draft mule replied, "I do not heed your threats. I only care for him who sits above you, and who quickens my pace with his whip, or holds me back with the reins. Away, therefore, with your insolence, for I know well when to go fast and when to go slow." The Fishermen. Some fishermen were out trawling with their nets. Perceiving them to be very heavy, they danced about for joy, and supposed that they had taken a large draught of fish. When they had dragged the nets to the shore, they found but few fish, and that the nets were full of sand and stones, and they were beyond measure cast down, not so much at the disappointment which had befallen them, as because they had formed such very different expectations. One of their company, an old man, said, "Let us cease lamenting, my mates, for, as it seems to me, sorrow is always the twin sister of joy, and it was only to be looked for that we, who just now were over-rejoiced, should next have something to make us sad." The Wolf, the Fox, and the Ape. A wolf accused a fox of theft, but he entirely denied the charge. An ape undertook to adjudge the matter between them. When each had fully stated his case, the ape pronounced this sentence: "I do not think you, wolf, ever lost what you claim, and I do believe you, fox, to have stolen what you so stoutly deny." The dishonest, if they act honestly, get no credit. The wasps, the partridges, and the farmer. The wasps and the partridges, overcome with thirst, came to a farmer and besought him to give them some water to drink. They promised amply to repay him the favor for which they asked. The partridges declared that they would dig around his vines and make them produce finer grapes. The wasps said that they would keep guard and drive off thieves with their stings. The farmer, interrupting them, said, "I have already 2 oxen who, without making any promises, do all these things. It is surely better for me to give the water to them than to you." The geese and the cranes. The geese and the cranes fed in the same meadow. A bird-catcher came to ensnare them in his nets. The cranes, being light of wing, fled away at his approach, while the geese, being slower of flight and heavier in their bodies, were captured. The brother and the sister. A father had 1 son and 1 daughter, the former remarkable for his good looks, the latter for her extraordinary ugliness. While they were playing one day as children, they happened by chance to look together into a mirror that was placed on their mother's chair. The boy congratulated himself on his good looks. The girl grew angry and could not bear the self-praises of her brother. Interpreting all he said, and how could she do otherwise, into reflection on herself, she ran off to her father to be avenged in her turn on her brother, and spitefully accused him of having, as a boy, made use of that which only belonged to girls. The father embraced them both, and bestowing his kisses and affection impartially on each, said, "I wish you both every day to look into the mirror, you, my son, that you may not spoil your beauty by evil conduct, and you, my daughter, that you may make up for your want of beauty by your virtues." The blind man and the whelp. A blind man was accustomed to distinguish different animals by touching them with his hands. The whelp of a wolf was brought him, with a request that he would feel it and say what it was. He felt it, and being in doubt, said, "I do not quite know whether it is the cub of a fox or the whelp of a wolf, but I know this full well, that it would not be safe to admit him to the sheepfold." Evil tendencies are shown early in life. The dogs and the fox. Some dogs, finding the skin of a lion, began to tear it in pieces with their teeth. A fox, seeing them, said, "If this lion were alive, you would soon find out that his claws were stronger than your teeth." It is easy to kick a man that is down. The quack frog. A frog once on a time came forth from his home in the marsh and made proclamation to all the beasts that he was a learned physician, skilled in the use of drugs and able to heal all diseases. A fox asked him, "How can you pretend to prescribe for others who are unable to heal your own lame gait and wrinkled skin?" The cobbler turned doctor. A cobbler, unable to make a living by his trade, rendered desperate by poverty, began to practice medicine in a town in which he was not known. He sold a drug, pretending that it was an antidote to all poisons, and obtained a great name for himself by long-winded puffs and advertisements. He happened to fall sick himself of a serious illness, on which the governor of the town determined to test his skill. For this purpose he called for a cup, while filling it with water, pretended to mix poison with the cobbler's antidote, and commanded him to drink it on the promise of a reward. The cobbler, under the fear of death, confessed that he had no knowledge of medicine, and was only made famous by the stupid clamors of the crowd. The governor called a public assembly, and thus addressed the citizens: "Of what folly have you been guilty? You have not hesitated to entrust your heads to a man whom no one could employ to make even shoes for their feet. The Wolf and the Horse. A wolf, coming out of a field of oats, met with a horse, and thus addressed him, I would advise you to go into that field. It is full of capital oats, which I have left untouched for you, as you are a friend, the very sound of whose teeth it will be a pleasure for me to hear. The horse replied, If oats had been the food of wolves, you would never have indulged your ears at the cost of your belly. Men of evil reputation, when they perform a good deed, fail to get credit for it. The Kites and the Swans. The kites of old time had, equally with the swans, the privilege of song. But having heard the neigh of the horse, they were so enchanted with the sound that they tried to imitate it, and in trying to neigh, they forgot how to sing. The desire for imaginary benefits often involves the loss of present blessings. The two men who were enemies. Two men, deadly enemies to each other, sailed in the same vessel. Determined to keep as far apart as possible, the one seated himself in the stern and the other in the prow of the ship. A violent storm having arisen, and the vessel being in great danger of sinking, the one in the stern inquired of the pilot which of the two ends of the ship would go down first. On his replying that he supposed it would be the prow, then said the man, Death would not be grievous to me if I could only see my enemy die before me. The Gamecocks and the Partridge. A man had 2 gamecocks in his poultry yard. One day, by chance, he fell in with a tame partridge for sale. He purchased it and brought it home that it might be reared with his gamecocks. On its being put into the poultry yard, they struck at it and followed it about, so that the partridge was grievously troubled in mind, and supposed that he was thus evilly treated because he was a stranger. Not long afterwards, he saw the cocks fighting together, and not separating before one had well beaten the other. He then said to himself, I shall no longer distress myself at being struck at by these gamecocks, when I see that they cannot even refrain from quarreling with each other. The Lion, the Wolf, and the Fox. A lion, growing old, lay sick in his cave. All the beasts came to visit their king except the fox. The wolf, therefore, thinking that he had a capital opportunity, accused the fox to the lion for not paying any respect to him who had the rule over them all, and for not coming to visit him. At that moment the fox came in and heard these last words of the wolf. The lion, roaring out in a rage against him, he sought an opportunity to defend himself, and said, And who of all those who have come to you have benefited you as much as I, who have traveled from place to place in every direction, and have sought and learnt from the physicians the means of healing you? The lion commanded him immediately to tell him the cure, when he replied, You must flay a wolf alive, and wrap his skin yet warm around you. The wolf at once was taken and flayed, whereon the fox, turning to him, said with a smile, You should have moved your master not to ill, but to good will. The Dog's House. A dog in the wintertime rolled together and coiled up in as small a space as possible on account of the cold, determined to make himself a house. When the summer returned again, he lay asleep, stretched at his full length, and appeared to himself to be of a great size, and considered that it would be neither an easy nor a necessary work to make himself such a house as would accommodate him. The North Wind and the Sun. The North Wind and the Sun disputed which was the most powerful, and agreed that he should be declared the victor who could first strip a wayfaring man of his clothes. The North Wind first tried his power, and blew with all his might, but the keener became his blasts, the closer the traveler wrapped his cloak around him, till at last, resigning all hope of victory, he called upon the Sun to see what he could do. The Sun suddenly shone out with all his warmth. The traveler no sooner felt his genial rays that he took off one garment after another, and at last, fairly overcome with heat, undressed and bathed in a stream that lay in his path. Persuasion is better than force. The Crow and Mercury. A crow caught in a snare prayed to Apollo to release him, making a vow to offer some frankincense at his shrine. Being rescued from his danger, he forgot his promise. Shortly afterwards, on being again caught in a second snare, passing by Apollo, he made the same promise to offer frankincense to Mercury, when he appeared and said to him, "O thou most base fellow, how can I believe thee, who hast disowned and wronged thy former patron?" The Spendthrift and the Swallow. A young man, a great spendthrift, had run through all his patrimony, and had but one good cloak left. He happened to see a swallow which had appeared before its season, skimming along a pool and twittering gaily. He supposed that summer had come, and went and sold his cloak. Not many days after, the winter having set in again with renewed frost and cold, he found the unfortunate swallow lifeless on the ground, and said, "Unhappy bird, what have you done? By thus appearing before the springtime, you have not only killed yourself, but you have wrought my destruction also." The Wolf and the Lion. A wolf, roaming by the mountain side, saw his own shadow as the sun was setting become greatly extended and magnified, and he said to himself, "Why should I, being of such an immense size and extending nearly an acre in length, be afraid of the lion? Ought I not to be acknowledged as king of all the collected beasts?" While he was indulging in these proud thoughts, a lion fell upon him and killed him. He exclaimed with a too late repentance, "Wretched me! This overestimation of myself is the cause of my destruction." The Birds, the Beasts, and the Bat. The birds waged war with the beasts, and each party were by turns the conquerors. A bat, fearing the uncertain issues of the fight, always betook himself to that side which was the strongest. When peace was proclaimed, his deceitful conduct was apparent to both the combatants. Therefore, being condemned by each for his treachery, he was driven forth from the light of day, and henceforth concealed himself in dark hiding places, flying always alone and at night. We'll have many, many more wonderful tales of Aesop in Part 7 of Aesop's Fables. Good night, Nora.